November 17, 1944. The morning air at Richlin Test Center hangs thick with frost, each breath crystallizing in the gray pre-dawn light. Inside Hangar 7, illuminated by harsh electric lamps that cast long shadows across oil-stained concrete, a modified aircraft rests on the apron. It bears the angular lines of a North American P-51 Mustang, yet something about it appears wrong. The rivets are uneven. The aluminum skin shows seams where German hands have attempted to recreate American precision. The cowling conceals not a Packard-built Merlin, but a Daimler-Benz DB605 engine, Germany's answer to a machine they could capture but never truly possess. Chief Engineer Franz Hartmann checks his stopwatch. Around him, technicians in oil-darkened coveralls move with the mechanical efficiency of men who have done this too many times before. The scent of aviation fuel mingles with machine oil and fear. In 30 minutes, test pilot Hauptmann Werner Müller will climb into this aircraft and attempt what every previous test has failed to achieve: flight lasting longer than seconds. The story of this doomed replica begins not with ambition, but with desperation. By autumn 1944, the Luftwaffe finds itself fighting a war it has already lost. American P-51 Mustangs now escort bomber formations deep into the heart of the Reich, their Packard Merlin engines pushing them to speeds approaching 440 miles per hour, while carrying enough fuel to accompany the big friends all the way to Berlin and back. The aircraft that once made Hermann Göring declare, "The war is lost," when he first saw them over the German capital, has become the symbol of American industrial supremacy. Each Mustang that appears in German skies represents something the Third Reich can no longer match: abundance, technological sophistication, and the limitless resources of a nation that can produce one fighter aircraft every hour of every day. The Mustang is not merely an airplane. It is a flying testament to everything Germany lacks. The Luftwaffe's Versuchsstaffel, the test and evaluation squadron known informally as Reservius Circus, after its commander, Hauptmann Ted Reservius, has been flying captured Allied aircraft since 1943. At least 2 P-51B models, and perhaps 4 P-51D variants, have fallen into German hands, intact enough to be restored to flying condition. These captured machines, hastily repainted with yellow undersides and German Balkenkreuz crosses, become traveling exhibits of enemy capability. German fighter pilots gather at airfields across the crumbling Reich to watch these alien aircraft demonstrate their superiority. T9 plus CK, a captured P-51B tested at Richlin, reveals performance characteristics that make experienced Luftwaffe aces shake their heads in grudging admiration. Walter Wolfram, a pilot with 137 victories to his name, will later write that the P-51 could do everything we could do and do it much better. But admiration is not victory. Studying the enemy's weapon is not the same as possessing it. In the sterile conference rooms of the Reich Air Ministry, desperate men propose desperate solutions. If Germany cannot produce enough aircraft to match American numbers, perhaps it can produce aircraft that match American quality. If the P-51 is the key to Allied air superiority, then Germany must build its own Mustang. The logic appears sound until it encounters reality. The captured P-51s undergo exhaustive examination at Rechlin. Engineers disassemble the Packard V1650 Merlin engine, measuring tolerances, analyzing metallurgy, documenting every component. What they discover staggers them. The two-stage supercharger that gives the Mustang its high-altitude performance requires manufacturing precision Germany's bomb-damaged factories can no longer achieve. The engine's bearings incorporate indium plating, a material so rare in wartime Germany that engineers initially mistake it for an impurity. The fuel system demands 100-octane aviation gasoline. Germany struggles to produce 87-octane synthetic fuel from coal. Most damning of all, the airframe itself represents a philosophy of design that German engineering culture cannot easily replicate. The P-51's laminar flow wing, designed by North American Aviation's engineers in just 117 days, achieves through mathematical elegance what German designers attempt through brute force. Yet the order comes down: build a German Mustang. The project receives priority classification and the euphemistic designation Project Amerikanischer Jäger, Project American Fighter. In workshops where skilled craftsmen once built Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs, exhausted workers now attempt to recreate an American fighter from captured examples, incomplete blueprints and photographs. The fuselage takes shape through laborious hand-forming of aluminum sheets. Without access to American alloys, German metallurgists substitute what they have, creating airframe components that weigh more and stress more easily. The wing profile approximates the Mustang's distinctive shape, but without the precise mathematical calculations that govern laminar flow, it becomes merely a wing that looks like a Mustang's rather than one that performs like a Mustang's. And then there is the engine problem. The Packard Merlin is impossible to replicate. Its production requires tooling, materials, and manufacturing expertise that exist only in American and British factories. Instead, engineers select the Daimler-Benz DB605, a proven engine that powers the Messerschmitt Bf 109G. On paper, the specifications appear comparable. 475 horsepower, inverted V12 configuration, liquid cooling. In practice, mating a German engine to an American airframe creates problems that cascade through every system. The DB605 cooling requirements differ from the Merlin's, necessitating redesigned radiator ducting. The engine mounts do not align, requiring custom fabrication. The propeller hub demands modification. The fuel system must be completely re-engineered. Each solution creates new problems. Each problem delays the project further, and time is something Germany no longer possesses. The first attempt at engine run-up occurs in October 1944. Technicians secure the aircraft to the hangar floor with heavy chains and rev the DB605 to full power. The engine screams, but the airframe shudders violently, sympathetic vibrations that American engineers had calculated away, creating destructive resonance in this hybrid machine. The test ends after 40 seconds, when stress cracks appear in the engine mounts. The second attempt, after reinforcement, produces different problems. The cooling system proves inadequate. The engine overheats within minutes, forcing an emergency shutdown. Oil pressure fluctuates wildly. The propeller governor hunts for correct pitch, creating a nerve-grinding whine. Engineers make modifications. They add baffles, adjust tolerances, reinforce structures. They are, in essence, attempting to perform in months what North American aviation accomplished through years of systematic development and testing. By November, political pressure demands results. The Luftwaffe is dying. American fighters swarm over Germany with impunity, strafing trains, destroying supply columns, shooting down whatever obsolete Mi-109s and FW-190 still manage to get airborne. If Project Amerikanische Jäger can produce even a squadron of high-performance fighters, it might buy time, might slow the inevitable. Hauptmann Werner Müller receives the assignment to conduct the first flight test. Müller is a veteran, an experienced test pilot who has flown everything from the rocket-powered Mi-163 to captured Soviet fighters. He examines the German-built Mustang replica with the practiced eye of a man who has survived 2 years of flight testing experimental aircraft. What he sees does not inspire confidence. The aircraft sits wrong on its landing gear. The fuselage skin shows imperfect fittings. When he raps his knuckles against the cowling, the sound that returns is not the solid thunk of proper construction, but something hollow, improvised. The briefing before the flight lasts 15 minutes. Franz Hartmann, his face gray with exhaustion and suppressed fear, outlines the test parameters. Müller will taxi the aircraft, perform engine run-ups, and if all appears well, attempt a circuit of the field, takeoff, 1 pass at low altitude, landing. Total flight time should not exceed 10 minutes. Müller nods, says nothing about the vibration he felt during taxi tests, nothing about the sluggish elevator response, nothing about the qualms that every pilot learns to recognize as the instinct that keeps men alive. He signs the flight authorization form. Dawn is breaking over Rechlin. The war will not wait for certainty. The DB605 catches on the third attempt, coughing blue smoke before settling into an uneven idle. Müller advances the throttle incrementally, feeling the aircraft strain against its wheel chocks. The engine note rises from rumble to roar to scream. At full power, the sound is wrong, a harsh metallic shriek that speaks of parts not quite fitting, of tolerances not quite met, of desperation masquerading as engineering. He releases the brakes. The aircraft lurches forward, accelerating down Richlin's runway, 70 kilometers per hour. The tail comes up, 100. Mueller eases back on the stick. The wheels leave concrete. For one moment, perhaps 2 seconds, perhaps 3, the German-built replica of an American Mustang flies. Then everything fails at once. The vibrations that engineers thought they had solved return with catastrophic intensity. The propeller hub, unable to withstand the asymmetric stresses of the modified engine installation, begins to disintegrate. Fragments of metal tear through the engine cowling. The DB605, starved of oil pressure as seals rupture, seizes. But the final failure is not mechanical but chemical. The improvised fuel lines, manufactured from materials never tested with high-octane aviation fuel, have been slowly degrading since the engine first ran. Now, at maximum stress, they fail. Aviation fuel sprays across the superheated engine block. The explosion is not large, perhaps no more violent than a heavy artillery shell detonating, but at an altitude of 50 meters, traveling at 200 kilometers per hour, it is more than sufficient. The aircraft becomes a falling torch. Mueller has perhaps 2 seconds to comprehend what is happening, perhaps another second to reach for the canopy release, perhaps another to realize he is too low, too slow, that there is no time. The wreckage impacts in a field 400 meters beyond the runway threshold. Recovery crews find very little intact. The DB605 has torn free of its mounts and lies buried in earth, its aluminum castings melted into abstract sculpture. The airframe is scattered across 50 meters, aluminum fragments mixed with soil. Hauptmann Werner Mueller's body is recovered still strapped into the pilot's seat, identifiable only by his dog tags. Time from takeoff to impact, 12 seconds. The official accident report, filed in the archives of the Reich Air Ministry, lists cause of death as catastrophic structural failure during experimental flight test. It does not mention desperation. It does not mention the impossibility of the task. It does not mention that Germany was attempting to recreate in months what America had perfected through years of systematic development, unlimited resources, and a manufacturing base that could produce 5 Mustangs in the time it took Germany to attempt one replica. News of the failure spreads through Luftwaffe technical circles with the speed of all bad news. Project Amerikanischer Jäger is quietly cancelled. The few engineers still assigned to it are reassigned to more pressing matters, attempting to keep the Me-262 jet fighter flying despite fuel shortages, or designing modifications to the FW-190 that might give it another 5 kilometers per hour of speed. No second attempt is made to build a German Mustang. The captured American P-51 continue to fly with Reserius Circus, but now they serve only as exhibitions of what Germany cannot match. Pilots still gather to watch them perform, still listen to lectures about American aircraft capabilities, still fly training missions against them. But the lesson has changed. It is no longer know your enemy so you can defeat him. It is simply know your enemy. Franz Hartmann writes a final technical report on Project Amerikanischer Jäger. The document is clinical, methodical, 27 pages of engineering analysis that concludes what everyone involved already knew. Replication was never feasible. The Mustang represents not merely an aircraft, but an entire industrial and technological ecosystem. Its Packard Merlin engine requires a manufacturing base capable of producing components with tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. Its airframe demands aluminum alloys formulated through metallurgical research. Germany no longer has resources to pursue. Its systems, fuel, hydraulics, electrics, armament, each represent design philosophies developed through years of systematic testing. Most fundamentally, the Mustang emerges from a nation that can afford to fail, to test, to refine, to rebuild. North American aviation produced over 15,000 P-51s during the war. Germany could not build one functional replica. Hartmann's report does not explicitly state this disparity. It does not need to. The mathematics of industrial capacity tell the story more clearly than any words. In the weeks following Mueller's death, the Luftwaffe continues its death spiral. The few captured P-51 still flying develop mechanical problems that cannot be fixed. Spare parts do not exist. American replacement components cannot be obtained. T9 plus CK, the P-51B that German pilots praised for its handling, develops engine problems in December 1944. Without Merlin parts, without tools calibrated to British measurements, without the institutional knowledge that would make repair feasible, the aircraft is grounded. It sits abandoned at Richlin until American forces overrun the facility in April 1945. Soldiers of the U.S. 2nd Armored Division find it in a hangar, its paint faded, its tires flat, surrounded by the wreckage of Germany's aerial ambitions. Photographs show American officers examining the yellow-painted P-51, with expressions mixing amusement and incomprehension. That the enemy would capture your own aircraft, study it, attempt to replicate it, this was expected. That they would fail so completely was the true revelation. The deeper significance of Project Amerikanischer Jäger's failure extends beyond a single crash, beyond one pilot's death, beyond even the technical impossibility of the task. It represents the collision between two fundamentally different approaches to warfare and industry. American aircraft production in 1944 operates on principles of standardization, mass production, and systematic improvement. Workers on assembly lines install prefabricated components built to exact specifications. When problems emerge, engineering teams analyze them, develop solutions, and implement improvements across entire production runs. The system is designed to learn to adapt to scale. Quality control is not merely checking individual aircraft, but refining the process that builds them. German aircraft production, by contrast, has devolved into crisis management. Factories operate underground to escape Allied bombing. Skilled workers have been conscripted or killed. Supply chains depend on slave labor and improvised substitution of materials. Each aircraft becomes a unique creation, assembled from whatever components are available. There is no time for systematic testing, no resources for refinement. The choice becomes building one aircraft perfectly or building 10 aircraft adequately. Germany chooses adequacy and still cannot build enough. The Mustang itself, the real Mustang, the American Mustang, flies as the physical embodiment of this industrial superiority. Its very existence is a form of psychological warfare. When Luftwaffe pilots encounter P-51s over Germany, they are fighting not merely aircraft, but the visible manifestation of American abundance. Each Mustang represents thousands of gallons of high-octane fuel that Germany cannot produce. Each represents aluminum smelted from ore shipped across secure oceans. Each represents engineering talent focused on refinement rather than survival. The sound of their Merlin engines becomes the sound of inevitability. German pilots learn to recognize it, that particular note, different from the Daimler-Benz engines they fly, different from any other aircraft in the sky. It is the sound of an engine operating exactly as designed, maintained by mechanics with access to proper tools and spare parts, flown by pilots who know that if this aircraft is lost, another will replace it tomorrow. After the war, captured German technical documents reveal the extent of the Luftwaffe's obsession with Allied aircraft. Files from Richlin contain detailed analyses of every captured type: British Spitfires, American P-47 Thunderbolts, Soviet Yak fighters. But the reports on the P-51 stand apart. The technical language barely conceals frustration bordering on despair. One anonymous engineer's marginal note, preserved in the archives, reads simply, "We cannot build this. We do not have the time, the materials, or the knowledge. This aircraft represents an industrial capacity we can no longer compete with." The note is dated January 1945, 2 months after Müller's death, 4 months before Germany's surrender. By then, Richlin is operating on borrowed time, test flights conducted when fuel can be scrounged, reports filed to ministries that may no longer exist. The symbolic weight of the Mustang extends into the post-war period, when German engineers and pilots are interrogated by Allied intelligence officers. The conversations repeatedly return to American aircraft. What astonishes the Germans is not merely the technical excellence of individual designs, but the profligacy with which America employed them. The United States built more than 300,000 aircraft during World War II, a number that German officers initially refused to believe. assuming it must be propaganda. When they accept the figure's accuracy, it reshapes their understanding of the war they fought. Germany entered the conflict believing in qualitative superiority, better training, better tactics, better engineering. America responded with quantitative supremacy, backed by qualitative excellence. The P-51 embodies this combination, an aircraft good enough to outperform German fighters, and produced in such numbers that even if Luftwaffe pilots achieved favorable kill ratios, the mathematics of attrition doomed them. In the final accounting, Project Amerikanische Jäger consumed approximately 200,000 Reichsmarks, occupied 30 engineers for 4 months, and resulted in 1 test pilot's death and 0 functional aircraft. Had those same resources been directed toward producing existing German fighters, they might have built 15 FW-190 or 20 Me-109. These aircraft would still have been outnumbered, still would have faced defeat, but at least they would have flown for longer than 12 seconds. The decision to attempt replication rather than focus on attainable goals represents a particular form of strategic delusion. When confronted with enemy superiority, there exists a temptation to believe that superiority can be copied, that excellence is merely a matter of blueprints and assembly. The truth, as Müller discovered in the 3 seconds between explosion and impact, is that excellence emerges from systems, from infrastructure, from the accumulated wisdom of thousands of engineers solving thousands of problems. The wreckage of the German-built Mustang replica is buried in the field where it crashed. Local residents, accustomed to aircraft debris littering the landscape, scavenge what they can: aluminum for cooking parts, wiring for repairs. By spring 1945, nothing remains visible. The Earth absorbs the evidence of failure. In 1947, during reconstruction, a farmer plowing the field uncovers fragments of the DB605 engine. He sells the scrap metal for a few marks. The buyer, a dealer in industrial salvage, notices American-style propeller parts mixed with German engine components, and becomes briefly curious about this hybrid wreckage. The curiosity passes. No one investigates further. The story of Germany's attempt to build its own Mustang vanishes into the category of wartime footnotes, overshadowed by more dramatic failures, more spectacular defeats. But in the archives of the U.S. Air Force Historical Research Agency, a single photograph preserves evidence of the attempt. The image shows the German-built replica on Rechlin's apron, taken during pre-flight inspection on the morning of November 17, 1944. The aircraft sits in weak morning light, its hybrid nature visible to informed eyes, the cowling slightly wrong, the landing gear stance not quite matching a real Mustang's posture. In the photograph's background, barely visible, stands Franz Hartmann, his face turned away from the camera. The photograph is catalogued with clinical precision: German experimental fighter, captured at Rechlin, April 1945. Note non-standard engine installation and improvised airframe components. No one who catalogues the photograph knows that the aircraft in the image never flew for longer than seconds. No one knows about Müller, about the explosion, about the 12 seconds between ambition and Earth. The legacy of Project Amerikanische Jäger is not the failed aircraft, but what the failure revealed. Industrial warfare rewards systems over individual brilliance, abundance over efficiency, and the capacity to learn over the ability to innovate. Germany produced individual engineers of genius, pilots of extraordinary skill, weapons of technical sophistication. But genius cannot compensate for absent resources. Skill cannot overcome numerical inferiority. Sophistication means nothing when fuel tanks are empty. The P-51 Mustang was not the best fighter aircraft of World War II because of any single superior characteristic. It was the best because it was good enough in all respects, producible in unlimited quantities, and employed by a nation capable of supporting it. The aircraft became a symbol not of American technological superiority, but of American systemic superiority. The ability to identify what was needed, design what was required, produce what was designed, and sustain what was produced. When former Luftwaffe pilot Walter Wolfram writes his memoirs in the 1970s, he devotes several paragraphs to his experience test flying a captured P-51. The aircraft, he recalls, felt alien: too many controls, too many systems, everything requiring adjustment and monitoring. "We had nothing like this in the 109, he writes. "Everything was simple and very close to the pilot. You fitted into the cockpit like a hand in a glove." But simplicity, he acknowledges, was not the same as superiority. The Mustang's complexity represented capability. Its abundance of controls reflected its abundance of performance. German pilots flew aircraft designed to be manufactured quickly and flown aggressively for short operational lifespans. American pilots flew aircraft designed to bring their pilots home alive after 8-hour missions deep into enemy territory. The philosophical difference, Wolfram realizes decades after the war's end, was the difference between a nation fighting for survival and a nation fighting for victory. On a spring morning in 1945, when American forces overrun Richlin, they find the test facility in ruins. Hangars have been bombed into rubble. The runway is cratered. Abandoned aircraft litter the apron. Me-262 jets without fuel. He-162 fighters without pilots. Experimental designs that never progressed beyond prototype. Among the wreckage sits T-9 plus CK, the captured P-51B that German pilots praised and studied. An American intelligence officer photographs the aircraft from multiple angles, documenting how the Luftwaffe marked and modified captured equipment. In his report, he notes, "Subject aircraft appears to have been maintained in airworthy condition until approximately December 1944. Subsequent deterioration due to parts shortage and general facility abandonment. Aircraft represents no intelligence value beyond confirmation of German captured equipment procedures." The officer does not mention the replica, does not know about Project Amerikanische Jäger, does not learn about the 12-second flight that ended in fire and failure. History, selecting which stories to preserve and which to forget, chooses to remember the real P-51 that escorted bombers to Berlin and back, not the German-built replica that barely cleared the runway before disintegrating. Yet the story, obscure, fragmentary, preserved in scattered documents and fading memories, carries its own truth. It speaks to the nature of industrial warfare, to the illusions of technological shortcuts, to the gulf between what desperate nations attempt and what exhausted resources can accomplish. The men who designed Project Amerikanische Jäger were not fools. They understood the odds, recognized the obstacles, knew that replication bordered on impossibility. But orders came from above, and in the hierarchy of military desperation, impossible tasks must still be attempted. Franz Hartmann, writing his final report in December 1944, concludes with a paragraph that stands as epitaph for the entire project. "The American P-51 Mustang represents the product of an industrial system operating under conditions of material abundance, technological sophistication, and temporal luxury that the Reich can no longer achieve. Attempts at replication are futile. Our efforts should focus on maximizing performance of existing indigenous designs rather than pursuing imitation of enemy equipment we lack capacity to produce." The report is filed, read by officers whose own offices will be ruins within months and forgotten. Hartmann survives the war, emigrates to Argentina in 1947, and never speaks publicly about Project Amerikanische Jäger. When he dies in 1981, his obituary mentions a distinguished career as an aeronautical engineer, but includes no specific wartime details. The families of the engineers who worked on the project carry fragmented stories, something about captured aircraft, something about a test that went wrong, something about secrets that were better left unexamined. Hauptmann Werner Müller's widow receives official notification that her husband died in the performance of his duty in November 1944. No details are provided. No details are requested. In the chaos of Germany's collapse, one more death among millions attracts no particular notice. The field where the replica crashed returns to agriculture. Crops grow in soil enriched by ash and aluminum fragments. Children playing in the area occasionally unearth bits of metal, curiosities that parents confiscate and discard without examination. By the 1960s, no visible evidence remains. The site is not marked, not commemorated, not acknowledged. It exists only as a reference in archival documents, examined by researchers, pursuing footnotes to footnotes of aerial warfare history. But the metaphor endures. 12 seconds from takeoff to catastrophic failure. 12 seconds that encapsulate the gap between ambition and capability. between what desperate engineering can attempt and what absent resources doomed to fail. 12 seconds that stand as testament to the illusion that excellence can be copied rather than systematically developed. The roar of a Packard Merlin engine carries a particular note, a sound that pilots who flew in World War II can still identify decades later. It is the sound of 490 horsepower channeled through engineering precision, of supercharger blades compressing air at calculated ratios, of propeller tips approaching supersonic speeds at maximum power. But more than mechanical sound, it is the sound of capability, of confidence, of a nation that could produce 15,000 identical engines and have each one perform exactly as designed. When German engineers attempted to replicate that sound, they discovered that excellence is not a specification to be copied, but a system to be built. They learned, in the most final way possible, that 12 seconds of flight achieved through desperate improvisation cannot compete with 8 hours of sustained performance achieved through industrial mastery. The lesson was written in fire across a German field in November 1944. The smoke rose, dispersed, and vanished. The lesson remains.